Hello, I'm Suzanne,
And I'm Zoe.
and you are listening to Sex Advice for Seniors. We came up with a strap line, but I've already forgotten it. Something about
Everything's better with kink.
everything's better with kink, but then we decided maybe that was a little bit too extreme for some of our more pedestrian listeners.
No,
So
not pedestrian.
pedestrian is
Um,
a word that we use to mean people who are kind of walking the straight and narrow.
okay,
Um,
yeah, sure,
Not
okay.
pedestrian as in on the sidewalk. No,
Yeah, no, but I mean, pedestrian to me has maybe this is just me. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I usually say something is pedestrian when it's not sophisticated or nuanced.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Maybe I'm using it incorrectly, which is very possible. I've been told by Peter, my former co-host, that he doesn't like the way I use the word heteronormative.
Oh, I've been meaning to mention, Suzanne.
Yeah, and he thinks that I need to use heterosexual instead of heteronormative, which
Yeah,
I said he's probably right. So yeah,
yeah, yes, I
he's right.
agree with Peter.
All right.
Well, just for people listening, heteronormative means that you consider heterosexuality normal and everything else abnormal.
All right.
You're
Yeah.
normalizing something that's just one particular flavor. So heterosexual is really what you mean to be saying sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. That's that. Yeah, I got that totally wrong. Anyway, enough of that and my cock ups and misuse of words. We are going to talk today about something that I know is really on the minds of many people in long-term relationships, which is how to put the pep back into your long-term partnership when you might have lost the pep.
Yeah. There are a couple of things. First of all, I have many people come through my practice, many women in particular, I think, who are sort of post 55, older than 55, who are in menopause, or postmenopausal, and they've been with their partner for a very long time, and they, sex maybe used to be kind of good. For some people, regrettably, it's never been that good, but even when you've had a satisfying sex life, but you've been with each other for 150 years and your bodies have totally changed and hormones are changed. And what happens then with sex? So, one of the things that I feel like saying right out of the gate is that if it's consensual and neither of you are particularly interested in having a sex life, that's okay. That's
Yeah,
okay.
sure. Yeah.
If both partners are on board and neither partner is suffering in that, there's no reason why you should feel any kind of pressure from the outside in to have a sex life. However, many people, for one or the other partner, they do want a sex life, and sometimes both partners really wish that they could recapture and relight that spark a little bit. And so, I have some things to say that might be helpful.
I think for me, it often becomes much more difficult when you perhaps haven't had sex for a long time. It's just kind of gone out of your relationship. You haven't made time for it, or, things have happened. Maybe I've read instances, for instance, where one or the other person has maybe struggled with depression, and that person has gone through a period of time where they just really didn't have any desire. And the other person is kind of just gotten used to it, right? But not happily, just gotten used to it. And then not really knowing whether bringing it up is going to be triggering, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
it could be yet one more thing that you're failing at if you're not stepping up in the relationship in the ways that people expect. So for me, sometimes timing is so crucial. Like if it's a little while, then sometimes you can like, hey, what's going on? But if it goes on like it did in my relationship for 4 years, then I just couldn't talk about it anymore. Just couldn't. tried to say something a couple of times, just didn't really land very well. So I just kind of stopped.
Yeah. Well, I think, and this is your former marriage, right? So there were
Yeah,
probably things happening in the relationship as well that
yeah,
contributed, right?
yeah,
What
definitely.
happens inside the bedroom and outside the bedroom is often very intertwined, right?
Yeah, for
If
sure.
you find yourself in a relationship, in, as I said, like year 150 of marriage, and, and essentially you're happy,
Yeah,
essentially you're doing okay, and you would like to sort of cultivate more desire, more passion, and more sexuality in the relationship. There are a few things to consider. And one of the things is that when there's so many sort of facets to this. One of the things is to recognize that we have a relationship with our own sexuality first and foremost, right?
yeah,
So we tend to think of sex as something that happens between two people. And actually, the way we think about sex, the way we feel about our sexuality and our sort of sexual creature that lives inside of us, that's part of us, is often needs tending to as we age, as things are different, as our bodies look different and feel different, in terms of stimulation and desire and arousal. And
mm,
so, really, sort of reinvesting in cultivating a relationship with ourselves as we are now, not
mm,
as we were when we were 20 or 30, but really like what's happening with me right now, and how do I find a sexual identity as for me, almost 60-year-old, as a 60-year-old, who am I as a sexual being at 60?
mm,
Fortunately, in the recent years, I have role models. I have Helen Mirren. I have Meryl Streep. I have Diane Keaton. I have Jane Fonda. Like, there's a host of really sensual, beautiful, sexy women who are over 60,
yeah,
and modeling that for us. So it no longer is it sort of, the Golden Girls with funny old lady hairdos that don't really resonate with me. I don't identify with. There are women who are who continue. Mary Steenburgen, and there's that movie. It's a rom com,
yeah.
book club.
Oh, yeah.
I love those women, and I really delight in their adventures. And they're certainly very engaged with their sexuality. Um, so um, so there's that piece, and the same goes for men. How do
Mm.
I be a sexual man? How do I have that piece of me stay alive into my 60s, 70s, 80s? Um,
I
so
think it's
that
a really good point, though, in that we have to acknowledge that as older people, trying to capture what we were in our younger days is a foolish and exercise. It's not going to get you anywhere except being unhappy. I mean, obviously, HRT to a certain extent does do a bit of that. And I never was on HRT, but I know lots of women who are. And literally, they say to me, it's like the switch suddenly went on, and I'm back to the way I was in this feeling sexual, feeling like, I want sex, feeling desire and arousal and everything. And they want that. And so they take the pill, the magic pill, and that magic pill gives them that feeling that they want to recapture, right? I mean, for me, I didn't really have an option to do that. So I had to struggle through that transitional period going on in my body where I was highly sexual to feeling very not particularly sexual, and even kind of a bit, just angry. I suppose I was a bit angry, and I have said this before, I did grieve over the loss of my libido. And I did go through that period in my life where I literally had to let go of this notion that that was ever going to come back, because I just thought it's not going to come back like that. So just, you're going to have to just let that go. And then I had to get used to the new person that I was. Now, this was not a quick sort of like 1 minute I woke up and felt like, yeah, I'm really happy about having no desire and having to do this and that. And it didn't happen quickly, but I did finally, after many years of soul searching, go through and accept that this new person was a new person with a new type of sexuality and a new way of dealing with things. And a lot of that then started to focus on fantasy, sort of role playing. I started to discover things that would start to turn me on again. And I
Right.
had to kind of go through a bunch of other stuff that I
Hmm.
realized didn't so anymore like it used to. And so I do think that that going through that process is a bit, for some people, can be a bit like grieving. It's not easy. But if you want to come to the other side, it's kind of felt essential for me to do that.
Yeah, I think you're describing, the process of reinventing, re-meeting, reinventing yourself, which we can do at many, many stages. Many
Yeah, yeah.
women feel that after motherhood when they have their first child, and then all of a
Okay.
sudden their breasts are, feeding machines, and their
Yeah,
and their bodies are different, and they feel different, and their sort of mental emotional state is much more focused on motherhood than it is on being a lover.
yeah,
So yes, like and certainly our changing bodies and our changing hormones is something to to recognize and name, and not. It's very hard to not see the sort of change in libido and desire as a loss.
yeah,
And I'm here to tell you that at the other end of the grieving process, there's a lot of opportunity, actually, and a lot of freedom.
yeah, yeah,
Potentially, it's a very liberating time for us. But, Suzanne, you're speaking to this other aspect that is also relational. You're speaking to what I was bringing up as, like, first and foremost, our relationship with ourselves.
yeah,
And then the same can be done for that sort of reckoning and, like, naming what is relationally. Because what ends up happening is when we're really young, and we have a lot of hormones, and our bodies are sort of on board very quickly, right?
mm,
Many times all we have to do is, like, see a look or a glance or smell a smell, and we're, like, lubricated and throwing our clothes off and throwing
yeah,
each other on the bed, right? And so what ends up happening is that sort of new relationship energy, or that's a term in polyamory, right?
yeah,
Or, like, that sort of spontaneity and passion. Our bodies can compensate very quickly. Like, it can be all about that. And that desire and sort of physical component can drive sex.
yeah,
When that starts to wane, it actually becomes essential to deal with the actual relationship, because as the desire and the hormones and start to shift and fall off,
mm,
and we are also sort of accumulating a ton of relational resentments and ruptures that never quite get repaired, and, like, so we're banking all of this sort of distance from each other, or we're sort of watering and nurturing and feeding a big elephant in the room that never really gets addressed. And then the hormones at the same time can't compensate for that.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a very good point. Yeah.
So what I'm often doing with clients at this stage who are looking to really get back into sex with each other is to do a little bit of healing things that have not been looked at and not been discussed, not been addressed, right?
Mm.
So there's a little bit of sort of relational repair in terms of the structure of the partnership and the emotions around that. And then there's the other piece of like getting back into the physicality and allowing it to be organically what it is at this stage. So slower, more connected, more, a lot more sort of teasing and build up and allowing the sort of both the body and the mind to, sort of slowly relax into a state of openness with each other.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the becoming aroused, as I've said before, becoming aroused, the desire, I think there was a word that you used for it before. Was it something arousal template? One of them was it proactive or reactive or
Oh yes, spontaneous and blanking. It's early for me in Los Angeles.
spontaneous? I did write it down.
Responsive.
Responsive.
Spontaneous and
Thank you.
responsive desire. Yes.
Yeah, and understanding that the desire follows the arousal, and that the arousal can, which is so different if you've been in a long-term relationship, because you're used to the desire coming first and then the arousal. And I think it flipping that narrative, if you've been in a long relationship, can be again another adjustment. It's like, what do you mean I look at you and you don't get wet? It's like, well, because
Yeah.
because I don't.
Because you didn't pay the electric bill. Pay
But on
the
the
electric bill. That's my foreplay.
well, pay the electric bill, and for instance, like offer to give me, like, rub my shoulders, or give me a nice massage, or hug me like you really want to hug me, or say come and give me a kiss, and then the kiss is tender and it turns into something a little bit more intimate. Like, you gotta kind of, like, in a way, it's funny, if it's the first time I've really thought about this, actually. In a way, it's like when you watch those old fashioned black and white movies where we couldn't show anybody having sex, right? But there was just like, there was dancing, and people would just like hold each other and spin each other around and do all that kind of Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers type stuff, right? And you're just like, oh my God, they're so hot together. And so for me, it's like all of those small moments will add up to, yes, I want to fuck you now.
Yes.
But without those small moments, I don't have much desire. That's, that's the thing.
I foreplay all day is
all day, right?
That's foreplay. And I can't remember who said it. There's one of my colleagues, another sexologist in the space. It might be Esther Perel, actually, who says foreplay for the next sex session starts the minute the present one ends.
Yeah.
Right. And it's true. And I think that there's this aspect of like, courting each other again, over and over again. And that what it does is there's sort of an underlying foundation in a relationship when you actively participate with each other that way, that is sort of a an underlying safety and softness and openness and an appreciation for each other. And listen, my husband started making my coffee every morning. He comes in and he brings me my coffee every morning and sweet talks me. Oh,
Yeah,
look, there's an angel on my pillow. You know, like, and honestly, it's like, oh,
that's
like,
so sweet.
like it
That's so
melts my
sweet.
heart and makes me want him, want to connect
Yeah,
and relax in his arms because he shows me in many, many different facets and ways throughout the day that he cares for me and that he
yeah,
loves me, and that makes me feel desire for him.
yes,
You know,
yeah,
it's not, and you know, partly I think we get lazy, partly I think we just sort of march through our day, and when it comes to sex, we just want to sort of like, we keep it siloed in this thing that we do. And I think that there's really such an opportunity to, you look at like couples, like big famous couples that have maintained these long marriages, like I always think of Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman,
oh,
and they adored each other. They
yeah,
adored each other, and there was a lot of that sort of ongoing sweetness and flirtation. You know, also someone asked them how they how they managed to not ever get divorced, and Joanne Woodward said, "You just decide you're not going to get divorced, even when you hate each other. You
yeah.
know, you just know, like, look, we're going to get through this, even though you're a schmuck."
And
So
also, I think another thing that you said once was about, and I was talking to a friend of mine about this on the weekend, which is about considering the relationship as the third person
yeah,
in your own relationship, and really contextualizing that. What does that actually look like? Is it a healthy blooming tree that you're feeding all the time with lots of water and attention and love, and it's blossoming and blooming and looks gorgeous? Or is it like a dead little shrub on the ground that that looks like it needs to be picked up and carted off to the, to the rubbish
yeah,
bin, right? what
yes,
what does that
and it,
relationship look like? And if you've gotten to the stage where your relationship looks like bickering, it looks like, there's not a lot of nice words being said, there's not a lot of time being spent on doing things that the relationship really loves, and all of that, then, how are you going to get the pep back unless you start feeding the relationship again?
yes, and for those of you listening who are sort of embarking on this, or it's been a year or 2 years or 3 years, you know, and you're not really looking quite at the relationship shrub yet, dead shrub, it's harder to bring the tree back to life. It
It
really
is.
is. It's much easier to maintain it and to feed and water it along the way. Otherwise, you've got major triage and major, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but if you find yourself there, there are ways to go about it.
Yeah.
But yes, I think the idea of the third, the relationship as a third entity is really can be so helpful, because you can look at together. You turn, instead of looking at each other trying to negotiate your needs, facing each other where it can feel like a zero sum game. You turn
Yeah.
together and you're in partnership in creating and cultivating something else. Um,
Yeah. And would you, I mean, one of the things I've said before is just like silly games, like leaving post-it notes around the house, or because again, it can be really difficult to articulate what, the fact that you do want sex, especially if one person's not particularly feeling it. And I know we're going to have a discussion with somebody in the future about if you're a low libido partner with a person who's got a higher libido. It's something super common now amongst our age group, right? And I know friends of mine that just say, just not interested anymore. So, um, and my other favorite therapist, Dr. Jeffrey on TikTok, who's awesome.
Yes.
He's so good.
Yes.
But Jeffrey on TikTok, I forget, Jeffrey Therapist or whatever his name is, he said, one thing you must never do with a low libido partner is just cast any blame, right?
Yeah.
If anything, just say to them, it's cool. You know what? It's fine. If you don't want it, it's fine. But just know that if you want it, I'm absolutely up for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like whenever you're up for it, I'll be totally up for it. But if you're not up for it, I'm okay.
Let's get Dr. Jeffrey on the podcast.
Oh God, I'd love it. But he's got so many millions of followers now.
That's okay. We're very special, Suzanne. He will be thrilled to come and talk to us.
Oh,
Yes. I mean, desire discrepancy is and it's really not just our age, actually. It's really exists, in all ages, and it can be really difficult and kind of devastating to a partnership. So, and it's very delicate. So yes, totally. Post-it notes. I'm laughing because people listening can't see me laughing, but I have, one of the things I often suggest is to leave each other Post-it notes of appreciation. And that's a good hit, to sort of, boost self-esteem and express gratitude and appreciation. And it's lovely. And I suggested that with clients of mine. He is he connects very physically. Like that's how he feels loved, is by having sex and hugs and non-sexual physical affection. And she just longs for that deep emotional connection. And the Post-it notes have become a point of contention, totally counterproductive now in there, because if he doesn't leave one every day, then she feels devastated. So I've introduced into the dynamic something to drive them apart.
Oh my God. So funny. That's really funny. I really like the Post-it notes idea. So we've got a few things that we've come up with. One is you can try Post-it notes. They don't always work, but you can use them to show appreciation. You can use them to maybe express your desire or something you'd like to do with no expectation, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got somebody that their libido isn't so high, you can just give them reassurance and tell them that you'll be there if they ever do fancy it. You can definitely just be more, just any kind of physical touch, cuddles, hugs, kissing, dancing, anything that brings you closer physically to the other person without necessarily being sexual. I think it's really important, especially if you've not connected sexually for a while, that the initial connections are just non-sexual. They're just platonic kind of touch, but with a bit of a something.
Yes, I really want to say a little bit more about that. I know you're in the middle of a list, but I do want to say that what you're saying is so incredibly true and important. And part of that is that our bodies, we want to be able to reconnect. Desire is a lot about connecting the erotic mind with the physical body. So how we're thinking about sex and sexuality and how we feel when we're having sex. And one of the ways to do that, you start to reconnect gradually and slowly by allowing the non-sexual physical touch, because then you're safe. There's no anxiety needed. You're just containing that in a hug without having to think about like, oh God, am I going to get wet? Is he going to think of my wrinkly body is terrible? Is it, like all that cascade of anxiety and thoughts. When you're connecting, it's like you're practicing. It's like you're sort of like, oh, I can be hugged and relax, and I can get out of my head and into my body, and there's nothing required of me here. Very healing.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. I think there are some people that have written as well to say that sometimes they feel that, and men especially have said that their wives won't let them even touch them anymore. And I suspect that's because there was the thought in the back of their head was they're only doing this to get something at the end of it. rather than, and maybe it is about articulating that and just saying, I just really want to hug you. Like, that's it. I'm not expecting anything else. I just really miss hugging you, and just leave it at that. So sometimes we need to be able to be clear about the fact that we're not expecting to have penetrative sex. We just want some type of connection. And it's, as you said, making somebody feel comfortable in that so that it can eventually lead to something down the line, but not necessarily.
Hold on, Suzanne. Are you actually suggesting that we start to communicate with each other about sex?
Why would I suggest that, Zoe?
Yeah, you know what? Here's something that I say often to the high desire partner in a couple dealing with desire discrepancy, is that you can't make somebody want you. You can't make somebody want to have sex with you. But what you can do is you can create the conditions in which desire can show up.
That's a very, very beautiful thought. I love that.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's very true. So, yeah, I think that's a good place to end. As good as place as any is, you can just lead that place where desire might turn up. So I think that's the thing, is like, go forward, listeners, without the expectation every time you touch your partner that it's going to lead to getting a shag. It can just be a really nice way to feel connected.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So, and that is all from us. And if you're not already subscribing to this, because we don't ever do those calls to action that people talk about all the time, but it would be really nice. It would be really nice if you did subscribe to our podcast. We'd love to get up to 1,000 subscribers. I think we're at about 850. So with another 150, I would love to get to 1,000 subscribers in the next couple of podcasts. That's a good goal. Another 150. I mean, it's ambitious, but with your help, listeners, we can do that. And and we're on TikTok and all sorts of other things. So it's been lovely to see you. Yes,
likewise. Always a pleasure, Suzanne. Thank you for listening in, everybody, on our shenanigans. Bye-bye.